Hello, I am Arnel Gutierrez, a college biology instructor of Bulacan State University Sarmiento Campus and a graduate student of De La Salle University, Manila. Last July 4, 2018, I had a chance to present one of my academic papers at the International Postgraduate Roundtable and Research Forum come Summer School 2018. This conference was held at the Education University of Hong Kong. The paper from which this presentation was based from was my term paper for my Philosophical Foundations of Science curriculum course. This paper entitled Bridging Gaps or Bridge Too Far from Neuroscience and Education to Educational Neuroscience describes the birth of neuroscience, its integration to the field of educational research, the challenges and barriers to such integration, and some suggestive means to address those challenges. A teacher regularly faces problems and challenges in the course of his or her professional duties to deliver effective learning to students. It is very common to observe teachers in faculty rooms and lounges convey about his or her difficulties that despite the efforts they give to employ the appropriate teaching strategies, many of their students still fail to learn the topic. Well, the teaching strategies we employ, the outcomes we expect from our students, and the questions we ask ourselves when we reflect are based on our teaching philosophy. How do we view teaching and learning? Some might describe teaching and learning as a commodity. Teachers facilitate the lesson and sell it to the students. The students are then expected to receive that learning as if teaching and learning is bounded by a contractual agreement. Psychologically, many teachers view learning as a change in behavior that results from experience, where associations, motivations and reinforcements, punishments, and observations are key factors that influence learning. We may also describe learning in sociological terms, wherein teachers take into consideration the cultural diversity of his or her students and expect them to organize their knowledge and transform their belief to be better members of the society. In the early 1990s, the field of neuroscience emerged, backing up the claim that at the most basic and mechanistic level, learning is governed by neuronal processes occurring in one's brain, that learning is a biological or neurological event. Neuroscientists solidly agree that learning occurs through the modification of the brain's nervous connections. Modifying the brain's nervous connections can be done by enhancing the synaptic plasticity, that is, increasing and strengthening the number of connections between neurons. Neural connections can also be affected by the availability and concentration of neurochemicals or neurotransmitters in the brain, such as dopamine, acetylcholine, and cortisol. Many educators believe on the potential of neuroscience to inform teaching, that a biological knowledge of how the brain works will help teachers teach and their students learn more effectively. To illustrate, Owens and Tanner in 2017 tried to explore the connection between what is known in neuroscience and education research. Specifically, they tried to discuss how common teaching techniques such as the use of active learning, concept maps, problem-based learning, and culturally responsive techniques are tied to neuroscientific knowledge. The first two techniques could benefit from our knowledge in neuronal connections. The use of a variety of active learning techniques address the specificity of neural plasticity, targeting the particular neural connections needed to succeed a particular academic task. The nature of concept maps to organize knowledge might help in increasing the number of neural connections, banking to the idea that a memory with more connections can be retrieved easier. The practice of employing problem-based learning and using culturally diverse examples, on the other hand, are linked to promote the release of dopamine and acetylcholine and inhibit the release of cortisol, the neural chemicals associated with promoting motivation, retaining attention, and stress response. On the other hand, there are some hesitations to adapting neuroscience to inform teaching. As teachers, do we really need to understand how the brain works in order to effectively teach our students? As noted by Lawson in 2006, teachers need to know how to help students develop intellectually and learn, and not necessarily how their brain works. Findings in neuroscience research gave birth to an educational movement called brain-based learning. It tried to connect education with neuroscience, translating neuroscience research results into classroom practice. But this movement faced a lot of skepticisms and critics. And here are the reasons why. That is why Brewer in 1997 labeled this movement as bridge too far. The idea that neuronal intervention will translate to an enhanced academic performance rests on the philosophical models of supervenience and simple embodiment. Supervenience and simple embodiment implies that cognitive processes supervene only on the physicochemical characteristics of our brain. Some philosophers see this representation as problematic as supervenience disregards the role of our body in the external environment with regards to the relation of our mind and our brain. Supervenience can also be illustrated with the popular view that sciences can be arranged in a hierarchical complexity. This is what we call the great chain of science. If we go up the ladder, this model assumes that physics, chemistry, and biology constitutes the subjects of neuroscience, implying that neuroscience is based on biology. It seems correct at first glance, especially that brains are basically composed of cells. But what if we look at the hierarchy from top down? Will this model imply that neuroscience could be reduced to biology? Presently, the most accepted scientific theory is that our brain is made up of billions of neurons, that neural activities has been the basis of brain research. Philosophy of science stressed that the tentative nature of scientific knowledge is the most evident limit of science. So if our view that brain functions are a product of neural process is a mistake, then we couldn't claim that neuroscience is founded in biology, and the implications it made for education will be put into question. This too limiting and questionable view of learning by neuroscience can be summed up with Brewer's comment that educators' current fascination with synapses and brain images causes them to overlook a substantial body of psychological and behavioral research that could have immediate impact in the classroom. Strug in 2011 supported this argument by asserting that some of the novel insights claimed by neuroscience actually has older educational roots. Brewer's and Strug's commentary can be interpreted as to reconsider not only psychology but also to integrate other disciplines in our attempt to study how we learn. Understanding learning warrants collaborative studies involving disciplines such as neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and educational philosophy into an emerging field called educational neuroscience. This emerging field has also the potential to address the philosophical questions about neuroscience being too supervenient. Shooks and Goswami tend to argue on Brewer's bridge too far assessment on the translation of neuroscience findings into educational practice. They suggest that the skepticism in neuroscience is brought about by the insufficient characterization of its role and potential use in educational research. They further argue that educational neuroscience is fundamentally different with the practice of translating neuroscience findings to inform education. Simply put, neuroscience and educational neuroscience are two different disciplines. Whereas pure neuroscience tend to operate in silo and incommensurate to educational practice, educational neuroscience is an emerging effort that integrates disciplines such as neuroscience, cognitive science, psychology, and education in order to understand better how our students learn and how these results could be used to better inform teaching and learning practice, curricula, and educational policy. The birth of educational neuroscience, according to Sedina, made a credible bridge between neuroscience and education. Educational neuroscience has been gaining traction recently, with programs relating to educational neuroscience being implemented all around the world. The popularity of educational neuroscience is sustaining as we are seeing great benefits and potential of this nascent discipline. Sedina in 2015 and Carew and Magsamen in 2010 discusses in their respective articles about the many research-based knowledge from educational neuroscience on how we can inform classroom practice, curricula, educational policies, and our own learning. This table shows some of these educational neuroscience research results. Of course, there are critics to educational neuroscience, specifically on the nature of cross-disciplinary research. One concern about this field is the definition of who should work in this cross-disciplinary research. Is it a combination of neuroscientists and educators? Or is it better that we have specialists that has training and experience in both fields? Who qualifies as educational neuroscientists? What we need in educational neuroscience, according to Howard Jones in 2010, is a person educated across disciplines. The issue, according to Sabina in 2015, is not whether neuroscience research results can be translated into classroom practice. The issue is about how we are preparing specialists to do this translation. Another problem with interdisciplinary research is the conflicting philosophical stances among the involved disciplines. To add, though is it common that within a discipline members share common assumptions, still, there are few members of the same field who might have different philosophical points of view. In the field of biology alone, variables incorporated into the research design of its subdisciplines usually vary. For example, in the subdisciplines of molecular biology and medicine, researchers would only study one or a limited number of dependent variables as affected by a single manipulated variable while controlling for the rest. This is what we call the controlled experiment. On the other end of the biological discipline hierarchy, ecology treats virtually all variables as essentially as it is concerned in interrelationships, thus purposefully treating the variables uncontrolled. A similar but a much wider philosophical gap could be expected from two entirely different disciplines such as education and neuroscience. Collaborative research involving neuroscience and education could be difficult as the hybrid incorporates both the microscopic activity of nerve cells and the complex social interactions between students and teachers in a classroom. So when researchers from different disciplines work in an interdisciplinary research, questions about the contrast around its research design would always be questioned. There will be conflicts about the formulation of research questions and the preferred methods and what evidences will be considered appropriate for the research questions. Furthermore, the different philosophical stances are also the main obstructions to productive communications among disciplines and effective translations of results for each discipline. This is what Polgat, Horvat, and Lodge in 2017 labeled as the hard problem of educational neuroscience. So, with my final thought, teaching is both an art and a science. With this, we cannot define learning just by using the view of a single field. We should go away with a debate on whose field is better and has the primacy to explain learning. Learning is not just a neurological phenomenon, but also a psychological and a complex social relation between the teacher and the students. Educational neuroscience is a welcome entry that has a great potential addressing this issue. Interdisciplinary work is evidently essential in many fields, especially education. We need perspectives both from science and practice to inform and reform education. Alternatively, we need people who have foot on both sides, one that has wide perspectives that can effectively translate pure science to the social and psychological dimensions of teaching and learning. Embracing the cross-fertilization of ideas and paradigms can result in the emergence of ideas that could benefit education. Professionals from concerned fields should constantly engage in a dialogue to resolve questions about its multidisciplinary nature. Thank you very much for viewing and listening, and if you have questions, you can reach me at arnel_gutierrez@dlsu.edu.ph. Bye-bye.